Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard, the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to say welcome to everyone who is able to join us. Those of you who are able to join us on Facebook Live, thank you so much for tuning in. I thank those of you who are able to join us here in Crowdcast. If you are watching on Facebook Live and you want to join us in Crowdcast so that you can download the workbook, you can go to crowdcast.io /lowercase e your hyphen first hyphen 100 hyphen days hyphen as hyphen a. Alrighty. We hope that you can join us live here in Crowdcast. If not, please stick around and watch. Basically, the difference will be you won't have access to the handouts. We got a really nice workbook. So those of you who are here in Crowdcast, I want to encourage you, please download your workbook. It's your first 100 days as a nonprofit executive director. You can download this and you can bind it. And if you so choose, you can even send it to a printer. But, I don't think that's necessary. You will find there a note from me basically outlining what is in the book. You'll find a worksheet to summarize your findings and solutions as you go along. And when I say as you go along, I'm talking about, after this is over and you're back in your work environment. You will also find a 100-day checklist, and you can follow along as we go through our PowerPoint presentation. You will see a worksheet for your 100-day plan. So we're going to give you enough information where you can develop your own 100-day plan, and then you will have worksheets that you can write your plan down, specific dates. We also have a weekly work schedule, and that's going to help you organize the work that you do on a weekly basis. So not only are you going to be able to develop a timeline for the entire plan, but you'll be able to go day by day on a weekly basis, Monday through Friday. And then there is an action plan worksheet, and that's going to help you to develop your plan for the organization. Now, what you won't have here is the outline for the individual plan, and I can share that with you after this is over. And I don't think I mentioned it. You will also have a sheet for your findings. So as you're in your first 100 days and you're doing your own due diligence, you will uncover a number of issues. So what these worksheets do is allow you to jot down the issues that you find as you sift through various information, as you talk to various people, and then you can also jot down the solutions, and then that will be the basis of your work plan and your schedule. And you might want to flip to the very back. The back of the book will have notes, and you can take notes as we go along. Alrighty, so I'm going to get our presentation so we can get started, and if you could just bear with me. All right, so if you have any questions, any concerns, please feel free to type your questions in the chat room. And then, you can also, if you have specific questions, you can ask questions here, or you can post them in the chat room. It's easier for me to see if you post them in the chat room. All right. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about your first 100 days as an executive director. And I want to be clear that everybody's walk is going to be a little different, But this book is based on experiences I've had as an executive director, and these are some general things I think that can provide a guideline for almost anybody starting as a new executive director. And this is a list of things that I think are very important for you to make sure that they're in place your first 100 days. So we're looking at about your first 3.5 months. And we definitely have in our workbook, we've got a schedule where you can chart out those first 3.5 months on a daily basis. Okay. So without further ado, I want to first give you a little information about Nonprofit Utopia. We are the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders, and not just emerging nonprofit leaders, but those leaders who are really serious about taking their organizations to the next level. We got a lot of really, really good content, and I'm not just saying this, but it's true. We got a lot of really good content that will help you to move the needle on whatever issue it is that you're trying to solve. And if you don't see what you need in the community, then we're pretty resourceful. We can make sure that you get it. We have created a safe environment in which our members can share ideas and discuss issues of concern in a safe space. What goes on in Nonprofit Utopia stays in Nonprofit Utopia, and you've got that guarantee for us. Now, our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders, and we provide ongoing professional development and networking opportunities, as well as a number of other resources. We're intentional about trying to create an environment where more experienced professionals, such as myself, can work alongside younger professionals. We realize that people in the baby boom era have about 10 more years before we reach retirement age, and there's a wealth of knowledge that we have that we would love to share. So the overarching goal of this community is to give our members the tools that they need to develop strong organizations that will make a lasting impact. But at the same time, we want to make sure that our members are being developed themselves. So our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for 50,000 people around the world by 2033. You can find out more about us at nonprofitutopia.com or nonprofitutopia.mn.co. So a little bit about me. I have well over 20 years of experience just in the nonprofit sector. I am a former executive director myself, so I understand what it's like to have that first day on the job and really wonder what in the world I need to do. And I help clients to move the needle on some of their most pressing issues. And I help them to answer questions like, how do I start a nonprofit organization and stay out of trouble? Where can I find good board members who will buy into the organization's mission and help raise money? And how can we put together a group of people that will work collaboratively and we build this collaboration, but at the same time, we are building ourselves and building our organization. So those are some examples of some of the questions that I am confronted with and I can help clients work with. And I do that through consulting. I do it through this community as well as through coaching for people who want to do a deeper dive. So over the years, I've helped over 750 people meet their professional goals, and I've helped raise over $100 million. And this is through proposal writing, through special events, as well as technical assistance. You've just been hired as an executive director of a nonprofit organization. What do you do in the next 100 days? And the things that you do will make or break, your success going forward. So we're going to talk about some of the strategies that you can use to navigate the organizational landscape to make sure that you're on solid footing as you move the organization forward. So we're going to talk about a half hour or so, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. So if you have any questions, please, by all means, post them in the chat room and I can come back to them after this is over. I am asking that if you're here to post your name, let us know where you're from, let us know what you want to get out of this, and I'll make sure that I can slant my comments that way. You will have access to downloadable handouts, and those come in the form of that workbook with the notes as well as spreadsheets that will help you as you go through that full 100 days. You'll get links to articles and resources. In fact, I'm going to have to upload some of those after this. And then you'll get a recording of this webinar. And before we go a little deeper, we need to just make sure that we're all on the same page as far as the role of the executive director. And for our purposes, we're assuming that there's a board in place and that the executive director is reporting to the board. So the role of the executive director is to run the day-to-day operations of the nonprofit, and that person, he or she, implements the vision and the strategies and programs of the board, as well as the policies. They engage in fundraising, they manage the staff, they manage the budget, and they also serve as the head administrator. So depending on the organization, those duties will vary, but those are the basic roles. Okay, I see that you're unable to download the handout or access it. All right, I will make sure after this is over that I give you a good link. All right, thank you for letting me know. All righty, so the very first thing you want to do is meet with each board member, and that's going to start with your board president. Depending on how the bylaws read, the executive director either reports to the board as a whole or reports to the board president. But regardless, the executive director needs to make sure that he or she is in sync with the board of directors and particularly with the president. If you're not in alignment with the board president or the board chair, then you are really in for a rocky road, right? You need to get a sense for their vision, a sense for their priorities, and remember, they evaluate you in your role as the executive director. You want to get a sense for what the power dynamics are. Just because people have titles doesn't necessarily mean that they are the most or the least powerful. There's situational leadership in which we focus on the power that person has just because of that title. And when that person no longer has that title, they no longer have that power. And then there are people who actually do wield that personal power, that personal influence. So you really need to spend as much time as you can really getting to understand those dynamics, understand who really, really has the power, who really has the influence, and make sure that you're in alignment with that person or that group of people. The next thing you want to do is read the bylaws. You want to understand the lay of the land. So that would include things like the organizational structure. You want to understand, the terms of each officer. You want to understand how many committees there are. You want to understand your role on the board. Are you a board member as the executive director? And if so, are you a voting board member? And if you are ex officio, meaning you're only a board member because you're in that spot as executive director. When you leave that position, unless the board says otherwise, you are no longer on the board if you are on the board in the first place. There are some organizations that choose not to have their executive director on the board, so you really, really need to understand where you fall in that structure. And you need to know what your limitations are in terms of spending, in terms of authority, in terms of your interaction with committees, and so forth. So you want to look also for ways that the bylaws can be updated. Are they still relevant for what it is the board wants to achieve? Have they gotten into a situation where they really need to encourage some people to leave? So is there language that sufficiently allows for people to leave gracefully? So all of those things need to be taken into account. You want to make sure that you read at least 1 year's worth of minutes, ideally up to 3 years of minutes. And you have to remember that these are legal documents, they're legally binding. So any votes that are recorded in these minutes, if there is an appropriate vote that conforms to the bylaws, then the board and the organization are legally bound by whatever those decisions are. You want to assess the board operations, and reading the minutes will give you a really good sense for whether or not this board is very active, if they're effective. Do they get stuck on one issue? Do you see an agenda item that's been on the agenda for a year and nothing's moved on it, or do they dispense of things pretty quickly? What are the priorities? And you can tell that, by looking at the matters that have come before the board and look at how the votes have been made. And you can get a sense for, if they record the votes individually, you can get a sense for what's important to people. But generally speaking, you don't necessarily have to record individual votes. You just record the numbers. Are there instances where the decisions have been properly recorded, or have they not been properly recorded? And you can tell whether or not they've been properly recorded by, one, looking at how the vote is recorded and whether or not that's in accordance to the bylaws. And then two, you can see over time if there are things that are being done that may or may not be consistent with the actions that the board have taken. In some cases, the board may be overreaching. In other cases, the staff may be overreaching. But, those are things for you to sift out. And then this is a really important one. Are they recording attendance? And is there ever an issue where certain people don't make meetings? Is there an issue where attendance is so low that they don't have a quorum? And when you don't have a quorum, you can't transact business, and then things get stagnant. So your minutes are a really, really good way to determine the health of an organization. Next, you want to read the board policies and procedures. So these are a little bit more detailed than the bylaws. Just think of the bylaws as the overall structure, and the board policies and procedures are the manner in which the bylaws and other policies are carried out. So are there ways the board operations can be streamlined? At least within the guidelines of the grant and within the guidelines of the bylaws. Are there any potential problems that could increase risk? So for example, things like a communications policy, if the communications policy is there or if it's not there, that can really make a difference in terms of your risk. There may be a situation, a controversial situation, and you have several people who are speaking, and one person who's on the board speaks out of turn, but that one person's word seems to represent the ideas or the consensus of the board. That can be problematic and that could be risky. So that's just one example. Are there additional policies that you can recommend? At the very minimum, there needs to be a conflict of interest policy. There should be a conflict resolution policy, hopefully before any conflicts arise, that kind of stuff. You want to be as proactive in your thinking. Just think of worst case scenarios and see if there's a policy in place that will anticipate that worst case. So if that worst case ever arises, you will have already had something in place, and it won't be a situation where you're responding and singling person XYZ out as an example. And if there are policies and procedures for the board, is the board in compliance? Are they following their own policies? You want to make sure that you read the financial policies and procedures. And every policy and procedure, whether it's for the board, whether it's for staff, whether it's for operations or programming, every policy and procedure needs to be approved by the board. And there needs to be evidence of that in writing, in your minutes, as well as some sort of certification on those policies and procedures that indicate the date in which they were approved. So generally speaking, are the policies and procedures clear? Do they follow what we call generally acceptable or accepted accounting principles? And you might want to speak to an accountant, a CPA, who is well versed in nonprofit matters. Just because someone is a CPA does not mean that he or she really understands all the requirements behind nonprofit accounting. I've seen some people get in trouble even though they had a CPA, but because they didn't know all the ins and outs of what was required for nonprofit financial reporting as well as regulatory reporting, they found themselves in some very sticky situations. So that accountant would be able to tell you whether or not you are conforming to generally accepted accounting principles. If there are audited statements, you want to look at those audited statements. And if there are problems with financial controls, there will be a note from the accountant. So that'll be a good clue for you to know whether or not the organization is following what we would call GAAP. A clue that they would not be following GAAP is they use cash-based accounting versus accrual accounting. So we're not going to get into all of that, but I'm just trying to give you some clues as to things to look for. You want to also know, is there proper separation of duties? No one person should have control of all of the financial operation. There should be checks and balances. So the person who is requesting funds should not be the same person who is approving funds. And then sometimes your organizations may be so small that you may have no choice. You may have a case where you can't properly separate, but that needs to be documented and it needs to be explained why you can't do it. But you always need to have things like 2 signatures for checks, just to make sure that no one person has all of the information. Are there additional policies that you could recommend? And is your organization in compliance with their own financial policies and procedures? You want to read the program policies and procedures. For every program, there needs to be a set of policies and procedures. You want to make sure that in your absence or in the absence of the people who are actually doing the work, the flow of work is clear and easily understood. You want to make sure that if there's some overlap or if there's redundancies, that there are ways that you can streamline. And then you want to understand too whether or not there's a good description of the roles and responsibilities? Are there procedures for monitoring and reporting? Are there any risks involved? So, especially if you have children involved, youth and children and other vulnerable populations, is there adequate insurance? Are there procedures for doing background checks and all that kind of stuff? All of those things, the less you have of it, the more risk you have. So you want to look at this also from a risk perspective and look at ways that you can minimize risk by making sure you have strong policies and procedures for your programs. And is the organization in compliance with their own program policies and procedures? Again, you want to do the same type of process for every policy and procedure for your HR policies and procedures. In addition to all of that other stuff we outlined, you want to make sure that you review the benefits package, review that with a lens toward being competitive, review it within your financial means as evidenced by the financial statements. Have those policies been approved by the board? Um, what about employee turnover? How is that handled? How do you handle hiring? Do you have proper descriptions? Are those descriptions, and when I say descriptions, I'm talking about job descriptions, are the job descriptions in alignment with goals and objectives and strategies of the organization? Is there an understanding? Do you have an understanding as to why people leave? Is there a policy for getting exit strategies so that you can really, really understand why people are leaving? Is there a policy for onboarding to make sure that people are getting the best experience when they come in so that they can hit the ground running in their jobs? The better the onboarding experience, the better they are in terms of performance. And hopefully, if you have good policies in place, if you provide a healthy and nurturing culture, and you want to make sure those policies actually support a healthy and nurturing culture that fosters diversity, that fosters advancement, then hopefully that will serve as a way to reduce turnover. You want to make sure that you meet with top staff. And when I say top staff, those would be people in your C-suite. That would be the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, the chief programming officer. Some people have a chief marketing officer. If you have a smaller organization and you don't have a C-suite, you want to get the highest level of management and meet with them. You want to get a status report from them. You want to get a feel for what their jobs are, what their goals, what their aspirations are, and what their sore points are. So not only do you want to understand what their personal goals and aspirations are, but you want to make sure that you understand how their job fits within the context of the strategy of the organization. What's been accomplished? How much money have they spent in trying to accomplish that? How do their jobs and performance align with strategy? I think I've indicated that. Are they happy with the way things are going? What would they change? And when I talk about change, at this point, you're just taking it all in. If you were to try to change things too suddenly, even though you know that there's a need for change, you can open yourself up for a lot of turmoil. And once you meet with that top layer of management, you want to then meet with the middle managers or the department heads, program managers, and you want to go through the same process with them. Ask similar questions and excuse me. And then you want to align their answers with their immediate supervisors. Is there similarity in what their goals and objectives are? Is there a similarity in their perception of what the job should be, or how their department fits in with the scheme of things? Is there an alignment with how they feel about one another's performance? If there are discrepancies in perception, that's one of those things that you want to make a note of. That is an issue, because you want to understand, is it a matter of management? Is it a matter of quote unquote poor performance? Is it a matter of um, expectations that are unrealistic given the resources within the organization? Again, you're not at the point where you're making any decisions. You're just talking to people, taking notes, really keeping abreast of what issues come about. You want to review documents and contracts. So that includes grant contracts, that includes leases, that includes operating contracts, that includes your own employment contract if you are a contracted employee, that includes contracts with other service providers, other partners. Are the contracts current? Is the organization in compliance? You hear that word compliance a whole lot, right? Are there opportunities to get better deals? Are there policies and procedures for the way you enter into these contracts and how you manage them and how you track them? Are those policies current? And again, is the organization in compliance? And if there are no such policies and procedures, it's your job to make sure that those policies and procedures are in place. And that's for every procedure that we're talking about. You want to, at this point, now that you've looked at the policies and procedures of the programs, you want to dig into the weeds and review every program. Are the programs operating in a manner that's consistent with their proposals and logic models? Is there a logic model? Have those programs been evaluated? Is there a formal evaluation? Is there informal evaluations? Are those programs in alignment with the strategic plan? Are the programs funded properly? Are they in danger of losing funding? Are they still relevant? Is attendance, still up in your workshops? Do people still use the services? Are there systems in place that will help you monitor the program performance, help you monitor the outcomes? And if not, guess whose job it is to make sure that those things are in place? So depending on the organization and how many employees, you may not necessarily have to do all of this work, but you as the executive director has to make sure that those systems are in place. So after you've looked at the various programs, you want to look at the operations. So in a nutshell, operations are anything that's not program. Programs are those activities that are looking to improve the quality of life of clients, improve the physical quality of life for the community, the physical infrastructure. So if you're in housing, you care about the impact that you make to the housing stock and that kind of thing. You want to look at your representation by a lawyer. Do you have a lawyer on staff? Do you have a lawyer at least at your beck and call? Is there a lawyer on the board? Are the board systems in place? Do you have a strategic plan? What are your marketing and communications like? What is your fundraising like? So are all of those systems running sufficiently well that they help you to actually serve your clients in your programs well? Are those operations in alignment with the strategic plan? Do you have enough money to actually finance your operations, your day-to-day operations, things, keeping your lights on, keeping your copier up and running, paying for telephone? Is there a performance management system in place to help you really understand whether or not your organization is running efficiently. Is there a way that you can compare how you're running compared to similarly situated organizations? So do you have performance management systems in place? Are there benchmarks that you're trying to achieve? Are you adequately funding your operations? And it's really hard, I'm going to tell you, to get money for general operations because most funders want to see the program outcomes. They want that halo effect for making a difference. But if you don't have proper operations, you really can't have programs that make a significant difference. And are there opportunities to upgrade those operations? You want to make sure that you review the financials. So when you review the financials, you want to make sure that you are looking at their reporting style. Do they do monthly financial reports? Do those financial reports include budget versus actual reporting? Does it include an income statement? Does it include a balance sheet? Does it include a bank reconciliation? Does it have a cash flow statement? Those reports need to be produced once a month, and they need to be signed off on and approved by the board of directors. You want to make sure that you're in compliance. And when I say in compliance, that means you have fulfilled the obligations for your funders. So are your funders' reports up to date? Are your reports with various government agencies up to date? Have you completed Form 990 with the IRS? Have you filed annually with the Attorney General for that state? Have if there are payroll taxes involved, if you have a staff, have those payroll taxes been paid? So everything that requires some sort of oversight, either by a funder or by some government regulatory agency, all of that stuff needs to be up to date. And it's really, really important that before you talk to any funders, you have a sense for where you stand on these issues of compliance, because one of the most embarrassing things that can happen to you is you go and you're asking for money and the funder has kind of gone behind your back to do their own due diligence to make sure that that you're in good standing with your reports with the state, and you can't receive the money because you haven't filed your reports with the state. And even worse, you haven't filed your reports with them. And even worse, you might be in a situation where your organization is in danger of losing tax exempt status because they haven't filed those reports for 3 years. And you want to get a hold of this quick, fast, in a hurry before you get really, really into your job, because you want to make sure, one, that the situation is manageable, and two, you want to make sure that you're not blamed for your predecessor's stuff. But even though this happened before you got there, now that you're in that job, it's your responsibility to clean it up. The sooner you identify those issues and come up with a plan, if there's a problem, coming up with a plan of action to address those issues, the better off you are. You come across as a strong leader, you come across as someone who is decisive, but most importantly, you have already, just with that act alone, increased the capacity of your organization to raise funds. You want to meet with clients. So you want to get a sense for what your clients think about the programs. You want to understand what their journey is like from the time that they first come in, through the intake process, even before that, when they make a phone call. So you want to get a sense for what their experience is like with the receptionist, what their experience is like with the person who handles the program. So at every stage from start to finish, what their experience is with the website. Get a sense for whether or not they like the services, what improvements can be made. You really want to keep your finger on the pulse. How do you engage them and keep them engaged so that you can make sure that your programs are always relevant to what they need? How can you put them on an advisory board to make sure that everything that you do is customer and client centered, and not a point where you're developing programs and building them and hoping that people will come? And how do you make sure that there's an ongoing feedback loop and there's ongoing continuous improvement? Meet with your partners. And in this case, when I talk about partners, these are organizations that have already been in collaboration with the organization before you got there. What do they think about your organization's programs and services? What is the relationship like? Has it been a good one? Has it been rocky? What has been their experience in terms of working together and trying to marry operational systems? Are there bugs in policies and procedures that need to be fixed? Are there ways that you can, with the existing partners, can you deepen those relationships? You might not want to deepen those relationships. In some cases, you might want to bow out gracefully. What kind of MOUs are in place, and what are the exit strategies? What are the goals and objectives for those collaborations? And how well have they met those goals and objectives? And how will their input be used to improve your organization's programs and services? You want to meet with other stakeholders. And in this case, I'm talking about stakeholders from the community or other people who have a vested interest in seeing your program succeed. And again, you want to ask similar questions. What do they think? What improvements would they suggest? What has the relationship been like? How can you engage them consistently? And obviously, you want to meet with your funders quick, fast, and in a hurry, but you never want to meet with them unless you have a really good grasp for what's going on. You may not know all the answers, but you really, really want to understand what's going on with their particular grants and whether or not there have been any problems. So you want to give them a status report and find out if they have any questions or concerns, and you really, really want to understand what motivates them, what drives them, what are their key issues, what are they trying to achieve, and how can you position the organization to help them meet their needs. So you got to be more focused on them before you can really, really ask. If there are any problems with your grants, um, you know, as a result of prior relationship, you got to be sure that you're ready to, answer any of those questions and come in with a plan of action so that you can fix those problems. How can you engage the funders either on your advisory board or even on your board? And that has pros and cons, but you want to make sure that you always keep open lines of communication. And how would their input be used to improve services or even create new services? And after you get all of that information, you want to do an assessment of your organization's capacity. So that'll be things like board, the leadership and management, financial management, programs, fundraising, the networks in which you operate, and the impact. And when I look at impact, I'm talking about, how well has your organization been able to meet their goals and objectives and outcomes, and how well you have systems in place that'll help you to capture that. And, in the nonprofit Utopia community, we actually have those assessment tools that you can use. And then you want to also assess your own leadership capacity and style. What are your strengths and challenges? What are your skills? How do you like to work? What environments do you really thrive in? And from what you can see, is the organization you're in now, is that the type of organization that you typically thrive in? Look at the culture. How much autonomy is there? Even though you're the head of the organization, you still got to report to the board, and the board is in reality, legally, the head of the organization. Is this organization a good fit? If it's not a good fit, you might be thinking about an exit strategy, a graceful exit. If it's not a good fit, are there things that you can do to improve it so that it's a little more conducive to how you like to work? And change is hard. Sometimes you can make changes to environments to kind of suit your leadership style. If it's a smaller organization, if people are open to change. If it's a large institution and there's not a good fit, there's very little that you can do. You also want to conduct a community needs assessment if there's not one that's done already. So it may not have to be something that's really formal, but you really want to get a sense for, what the main issues are in the organization. I'm sorry, in the community, and whether or not your organization is even positioned to give an adequate response. Who else is out there addressing those needs? And how well does your organization address those needs, and how well do your competitors or potential collaborators address those needs? And even if your organization is part of a network of people that are doing similar things or complementary things, are there still gaps in services, and are there ways your organization can actually fill those gaps? And after that, you want to develop an individual leadership plan. So you're going to identify and state your own leadership style, your strengths and your weaknesses, your professional goals and objectives as they relate to you personally, as they relate to your ability to lead the organization to its desired goals and objectives and fulfill its strategies. So you want to have goals and objectives and make sure that they're in alignment with the organization's goals and objectives. And then you want to identify those activities in which you need to engage so that you can increase your chances of success. Do you need more professional development? Do you need to join professional associations so that you're in the loop and plugged in? Do you need to find a mentor who can help you navigate, and make sure that one of those mentors is your board president, so that that person can be, a good sounding board and help you navigate the choppy waters. And again, you want to keep the board abreast of your progress. And after that, you want to develop an organization action plan. So given, all of the information that you have, given all of the issues that you have identified and ways that you can address those issues, you need to prioritize them, determine who is responsible, determine if and when those issues get addressed. Some things may not be worth addressing. You might find that it might be in the organization's best interest not to engage in certain programs, services, and activities. And you might have, this process will give you a good reason, a good rationale for making that decision. So based on all of the stuff that you uncover, based on what the organization's goals, objectives, and strategic flow is, you want to prioritize and then proceed accordingly. You want to develop a plan that will list the tasks, indicate who's responsible, indicate a deadline by which those tasks will be taken care of. And this is not a strategic plan. This is just action planning to make sure that you are up to speed and you can identify issues going forward. And at the appropriate time, if the board wants to go through a strategic planning process, then you will have been very, very equipped to start that process. You can't really have an effective strategic planning process without really understanding what's going on in the organization, without understanding what's going on with your partners or in the environment or with your employees. So again, this action plan is just so you can get a firm grasp of what's going on and then move forward. And then finally, you want to implement the plan that you put in place. And you want to be able to report your progress on a monthly basis to not only to your staff, but to the board as well. You want to report to every stakeholder that you've been engaged with. And you report as appropriate. You give information on an as needed basis, but everyone needs to be kept abreast of any progress that you make. So, from a client's perspective, if there were problems with certain aspects of a program, they weren't running smoothly or the quality wasn't up to par, you want to tackle whatever those issues are. You want to raise the quality, and then you want to communicate that out to your clients that the quality of service has improved. And of course, you want to share that with your funder, but you want to communicate information as appropriate to the audience. All right, so if you have any questions, you can if you're in a chat room, you can post those questions right now. If you are on Facebook Live, you can post those on Facebook Live, and I will get back to you just as soon as I can. I can't see what you're writing right about now. And if you have any questions, that you hadn't thought about just now, you can always email me at ValerieFLeonard@nonprofitutopia.com. All right, so I want to thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're taking time from your busy schedule to be with us. So I'm going to hold it open for just a little bit longer. If you have any questions, please feel free to share them in the chat room. I know that there was a concern about the link to today's workbook not working. I will make sure that I fix that link. I will also email you to let you know that that link is working, and I'll send you the link, and it'll also be in this forum. All righty. So again, I want to say thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to sign off now, and this recording will be ready in about, I would say about a half hour or so. All righty. So thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.